I hope we're not too late to be able to have a good conversation.
Yes, yes, it's completely fine. So we were discussing a few important things regarding our final term. So students are joining the class, inshallah. First, I'll introduce you to the students, and then the class will start the session.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, okay, class. Let me introduce you to Dr. Zachary S. Davis. Hope I'm pronouncing the right name.
Yes.
Okay, he is a senior fellow at the Center for Global Security Research at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory and visiting research professor at the Naval Postgraduate School. He has broad experience in intelligence and national security policy and has held senior position in the executive and legislative branches of the U.S. government. His regional focus is South Asia. Professor began his career at the Congressional Research Service at the Library of Congress and has served in the State Department, congressional committees, and the National Security Council. In 2006 and 7, he was senior advisor at the National Counter Proliferation Center in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Today, the professor will be discussing the topic regarding the origin of modern deterrence in the Cold War and reviewing its current status. So, Professor, it's over to you. You may start.
Thank you so much, Professor. I'm honored to have the opportunity to speak to you. Assalamu alaikum to all of you. Turn on your cameras and say hello to me. We're very far away, but I'd like to know you a little bit more so that we can have a conversation, because I think that's probably more useful than just listening to me talk, because I'm very good at talking. I talk a lot. So I'm coming to you from California, where I work as Professor Harris has mentioned, at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. And of course, you know that to be a nuclear weapons development laboratory, one of the 3 nuclear weapons laboratories that grew out of the Cold War. And this was an integral part of the deterrence strategy of the United States to develop nuclear weapons. And I think for you, and I hope you will join the conversation and share your own ideas about this, because the concept of deterrence as it developed out of the Cold War has now become one of the main pillars of the international security architecture, right? Pakistan and India and China, and of course, the United States and Russia, all the nuclear weapons possessing states believe in this concept that peace comes from deterrence, that deterrence, being ready to deter, and we'll talk about that a little bit, aggression is the surest way to establish and maintain peace. And so throughout the Cold War, academics and scholars have called this the long peace, that because of nuclear weapons, because of the presence of nuclear weapons, the incidence of major warfare has been greatly reduced. And this is not a guaranteed or really even a provable concept. And so it's interesting that it is so central to our thinking, and yet from an academic, from a scholarly point of view, it's not even something that you can actually prove, right? Because deterrence is a psychological relationship between human beings. And despite all the technology and the bombs and the postures and the doctrine and the strategy, what it comes down to, right, is that you're trying to maintain a psychological relationship with an adversary. And you're signaling to that decision maker, because, you know, what do nation states communicate to one another? Is it a population that is communicating to another population? Is it a military that is communicating to another military? Is it an elected leader who has communicated with other elected leaders? So when we're talking about deterrence and this relationship of psychological concepts, it's important to ask, who is making the decisions and who is affected by the signaling, right? Who are you communicating with? So what is it that deterrence is trying to convey, right? You're trying to convey to an adversary or a potential adversary or proven adversary. And of course, what I'm inviting you to do is to apply these concepts to the South Asia context. And that is something that's important to me, and it's something that I've studied my whole career. That is the emerging deterrence relationship between India and Pakistan. And the thing that I'm going to ask you to think about is the question of whether the relationship, the deterrence relationship between India and Pakistan is different than any other deterrence relationship in the world, or are they all the same because we're all people? Is this a universal concept, or is it something that has to be tailored and developed and cultivated according to the different cultures, the different societies, the different histories, the different geographies, the different countries? Is it a universal concept that applies to every deterrent relationship, whether that be in the Middle East or in Europe and NATO, or in Asia between China and its neighbors, or North Korea, or India and Pakistan? So the concept, the universal concept, of course, is that you signal, convey, communicate to your adversary that certain types of aggression, and in particular a nuclear attack or a large-scale aggression, military attack on the homeland, would be met with such a fierce response that it wouldn't be worth it, that the aggressor would never achieve their objectives. It would be self-defeating, that no sane, no rational person would make such a decision because it would mean the end of their own well-being, right? So it would be self-defeating to conduct an attack because the retaliatory consequence, right, the nuclear response to such an aggression would be such that no benefit could come. And as you may recall, a famous line between Reagan and Gorbachev, who agreed that a nuclear war must never be fought and could never be won, right? So the underlying concept coming out of the Cold War was that war itself, that major warfare, was no longer possible because it was so self-destructive and self-defeating that you could never win a war that involved nuclear weapons. It would mean total destruction. And so there developed a debate about the nature of deterrence, with one school saying, look, nuclear deterrence is obvious. We all understand it. You don't need to do or say much more about it. Everyone understands that an exchange of nuclear weapons would be the end of civilization. It would be the end of everything. And so a few nuclear weapons, and what you would call, and what Pakistan has used to call, a minimum deterrent, right? The minimum necessary amount. So if you have a few bombs, that should be sufficient. And another school of thought developed and ultimately has won the day. And the reasons for that are interesting and hotly debated, right? And they're important even today in our country and in your country. And that is, no, deterrence means that you have to cover the full spectrum. Deterrence means that you have to prepare for every possible contingency. Deterrence has to be developed constantly and cared for and nurtured like a garden. And you have to keep adding and moving the pieces around on the chessboard. That deterrence is actually a very complex concept that needs to be played at multiple levels. And deterrence requires that you make an escalatory bridge between conventional conflict and nuclear conflict. And that by caring for each of these levels of conflict, you make sure you communicate to your adversary that the war at any level would be self-defeating and that they could never win. And so peace will prevail. Now, right now, in our country and with the election, you're going to see more and more of a debate about what kind of a nuclear arsenal is required to convey to your adversaries. And this is where I want to move forward from the old Cold War model to what's happening in the world today. Because the deterrence concept in the Cold War was fairly straightforward. And it was more or less nuclear weapons deterring the use of nuclear weapons. But with an important caveat, and this is one of the topics that I, over the years, have had really good discussions with my Pakistani colleagues who are very sophisticated in this thinking and have done their research on these topics. And that is the question of extended deterrence. So for the United States, we extended our deterrent umbrella, our nuclear protection, to NATO, right, to Europe. And we formed an alliance that had a nuclear guarantee associated with it, which is if the Russians invade Europe, if the Soviet Union invades Europe, then we, the United States, will use nuclear weapons to fight them. And that we would use nuclear weapons even in a conventional conflict to prevent the defeat of Europe in the face of Soviet aggression. Well, we also in the United States extended our deterrent guarantees to our former adversaries in World War II in Asia. So in Japan became an ally, and we extended a nuclear guarantee to Japan, and as well in South Korea, where we used to station nuclear weapons as a part of our extended deterrent. So we have deterrent relationships in Asia and deterrent relationships, and this greatly complicates the equation. So let me bring us up to speed. So that's the Cold War story. And in a way, the Cold War was simple because the main dynamic, the main deterrent dynamic, was between the United States and the Soviet Union, and everything else came under that. Everything else was a subheading of that major deterrent relationship. And of course, as I was mentioning earlier, there was always a question of how much is enough and what kind of forces do you need? And if you need a triad, right, a nuclear triad, that is land, sea, so you have your bombers, and you have your ICBMs, and then you have a sea-based component. And that is to make sure, as we were talking about, that no adversary would ever think they could get away with a first strike, because you could never wipe out the whole force. So there would always be an assured retaliatory force. No matter what happened, the adversary always understood that there was no possibility of disarming the United States, and vice versa. And the Soviet Union had a fearsome triad. And I think the world and most people in both countries now reflect back on the Cold War and understand that both countries overbuilt their nuclear arsenals, and we got to a point where there were 50,000 nuclear weapons of varying types, small, big, medium, and it got ridiculous. That central concept that I was referring to at the beginning, like how much is enough, and what does it take to convey that a nuclear war would not ever be beneficial to anyone, was clearly surpassed a long time ago, right? With 50,000 nuclear weapons, it certainly was enough to destroy civilization, and it spawned a number of peace movements throughout the world. And they're very active today in opposing both horizontal and vertical proliferation of nuclear weapons. That is, the weapon states building more and more countries getting nuclear weapons, other than the 9 that have them already. So let's come up to speed. What has changed with the end of the Cold War, and how has deterrence changed? Well, one thing that has changed, that there's been some spread of nuclear weapons, but not as much as one might have imagined. And so there's really quite a limited number, 9 or so countries that have nuclear weapons. And that's largely because of the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty and the norms and institutions and extended deterrence relationships that conveyed to most countries that they did not need an independent nuclear weapons force. Only a very few countries felt compelled to go to possess their own nuclear force. And that is because, like Pakistan, they had an urgent security threat that could not be addressed through conventional defenses. And so a few countries felt that they needed to enter the realm of deterrence and to convey to adversaries that a fearsome response would make their aggression self-defeating. And so, in a way, you can feel pretty optimistic about the world if you look at the limited spread of nuclear weapons, or you could look at it kind of pessimistically, that the world right now is going in a direction that is no longer controlled, no longer defined by the Cold War relationships, and that the multipolarity, that is, and I'm assuming that you folks are familiar with the basic international relations terminology, that the multipolar Cold War system is now breaking down, and the norms and institutions that go along with it are being challenged increasingly. And we're moving towards a world where the United States is no longer in the predominant position that it was. Russia is now a medium power, and NATO is redefining itself. Europe is in transition, and most importantly, you have the rise of some emerging great powers. And most importantly, of course, is China. But also India. And India sees itself as a key part of this new emerging world order, which is far more equal amongst the major powers than previously. And along with this major shift in the international order, you are possibly seeing new security requirements and new security relationships developing. And so you see countries that do aspire to take to redefine their place in the international order, like Iran and like India, trying to assert their role. And nuclear weapons are certainly a key part of defining the balance of power in the world. But what's really interesting, and the main thing I want to leave you with, and I'd like to open the discussion for anyone that might have some thoughts on this, is the two big and related developments. One is the multi-domain or complex deterrence. So whereas nuclear weapons used to be primarily used to deter nuclear weapons, or in some cases, like in Pakistan, to deter major war against it. What you see now is more of a mixing of new domains of conflict. And I know a few of you, especially very young people, are all quick to figure this out. But it's the cyber domain. And the cyber domain of conflict has now become a major area and a major addition to great power competition. This is an area of conflict and competition that has now complicated the nuclear realm. The other big realm that it has emerged is the space domain, and there is a new competition amongst the great powers in space and space conflict and space warfare. Now, importantly, and what I would ask of you is to put a lot of thought towards the idea of establishing some norms of behavior, some rules, hopefully even maybe some treaties about the competition to control the competition in these new domains, because there is no norm of behavior, and the competition is now, as you can see, especially in cyber, less visibly though in space, is that there's quite a lot of danger for escalation and quite a what some scholars have called entanglement between these domains and the nuclear domain. And so it's made deterrence and the great power competition much more complicated when you add these new domains. Some might also add that there's new, with the autonomous vehicles, you might add more deep ocean and deep underground as also domains of conflict. But the point of it is that deterrence is not as straightforward as it used to be, and all of the deterrence concepts and the signaling that we used to think about as defining the nuclear deterrence relationships has now become far more complex. The other thing, and I'm going to stop talking after this, but the other thing for you to contemplate that has greatly complicated the world and greatly complicated military competition is emerging and disruptive technologies. And whereas even with a nuclear triad, you know, you had manned aircraft, and then you had ICBMs, and you know, it was well understood which technologies were directly related to the competition. But what we are seeing now as this huge explosion of new technologies, and it's not just cyber and space, but it's in materials and biology and chemistry and many other applied sciences. You may have heard of additive manufacturing, but quantum computing, hypersonic vehicles, artificial intelligence. So these things are complicating the competition, and they're giving new energy to these military applications. And so this is going to mean that this fairly simple concept of deterrence has a whole new area of competition to think about. And so what does deterrence in this new environment, which is geopolitically, conceptually, and technologically far more advanced than when the beginning of the nuclear age, the initial concepts were first put forward. So with that, I see a number of students here. I'd really like to hear from you. I'm sorry for being late, and I'm sorry that it's so late for you there. I apologize. As I told Professor Harris, I study technology. I have a new book coming out on technology, but I'm not good at it myself. I'm more more of an older generation. You could see the gray in my beard. And so we, and I apologize for this, are leaving this new world up to you folks, you students, to figure out and try to find ways to avoid conflict and ensure the peace of the future. I'm happy to talk more about South Asia or the complex deterrence relationship that has emerged. I might add, this is another example of the new complexity. That is, you have a deterrence triad in South Asia now between China, India, and Pakistan that is not like anything that we've seen historically. So that's very interesting conceptually and for reasons of real peace and security. So thank you for listening, and thank you for your patience, and thank you to Professor Harris for inviting me and for all of your patience. And I'd like to take any questions or hear what you have to say about it. And please turn on your camera and say hello to me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Davis. Actually, there is a problem in Pakistan because we have connectivity issues. So maybe the students are not opening the cameras due to the connectivity issue. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Davis, for giving us your precious time. And now the forum is open to the students. Students, if you have any queries, any questions to ask the doctor, you may. Let me start from myself. I have a okay. Okay, what we studied in international relations international system. One-type polarity is always considered as the most problematic system because when multiple states have the balance of power, so there is a more chance of war. What we observed that President Donald Trump in 2017 said that let it be an armed race. We will outmatch them at every pass and outlast them all. When we come to Russia, so in October 2018, the language used by Mr. Putin, so he said that our nuclear weapons doctrine does not provide for a preventive strike. So the great powers, the language they are using, the attitude that they are having, it's more dangerous. So how do you see that the attitude that these leaders are having, it will endanger the nuclear war, and the concept of deterrence might comes in danger when the states are having this kind of behavior. So how do we control when the great states are having this kind of attitude?
Yeah, that's another central concept that has run throughout the history of the nuclear age, and I'm afraid it's one that continues to be elusive. So two things come from that. One is the question of arms racing, right? And much has been written about arms race, right? And it's a tit for tat action reaction, and the idea being that it is essential to maintain a balance so that one side doesn't have the idea that it is so far advanced, that it has such an advantage that it might be tempted, and that creates what we would call instability, right? Deterrence instability, when there are questions about deterrence. And I would say this is very much the case in South Asia. That India and Pakistan don't see the arms race in the same way, and that creates instability in that there's not a common understanding of the deterrent power, right? Whereas in the Cold War, at the very least, you could say the Soviet Union and the United States both understood that it was out of control and dangerous. And so what we had to manage, and this is the key word, manage, and the answer to your question, manage, you needed to manage that relationship because both sides realized that it was very dangerous and that there were instabilities. And those instabilities often come from another buzzword, asymmetries, right? That is differences in the forces, differences in the force posture that might lead one side to think that, you know, we have an advantage in this area. So we have more ICBMs, or we have more weapons, or we have, you know, we can get through their radar. We have this advantage, right? So when one side thinks it has an advantage, the other side needs to respond. And that's where you get the arms race dynamic. And I'm very sorry to say that the management, that is the diplomacy and the arms control that was developed throughout the Cold War as a way to manage this competition and make sure that these asymmetries did not cause instability, right? So that both sides were on the same page, right? We all understand this is dangerous. We all understand that the stakes of the game, that what's at stake here is humanity. It is the survival of the nation. It's the lives of millions of innocent people. So with that understanding, the Soviet Union and the United States developed these management techniques, which we could call arms control, right? And arms control requires restraint, right? Arms control requires an agreement amongst the parties to not do certain provocative things. And so we had a very robust history of arms control over the years. And we had, you know, the SALT treaties, which limited launchers and limited types of systems. So you can limit, there's lots of things you can limit. And one of the most successful treaties was the ABM treaty, anti-ballistic missile treaty, where both sides agreed not to try and defend against the other's retaliatory forces, understanding that that vulnerability was the key to, you know, to deterrence. And so, you know, to limit that would be to increase risks. So both of these things have broken down for the United States and Russia, right? We have no more arms control, and even the treaties that we once had, the ABM treaty, the INF treaty, you know, we banned a certain class of medium-range missiles, which stopped that competition in these dangerous areas. And that has all broken down. And the Chinese are not interested. They're building up their nuclear weapons, and they are telling the United States, look, when, you know, you guys still have thousands and we have hundreds. So when you come down to our level, we'll talk. And the United States has been trying to invite China to saying, well, okay, look, let's not talk about limitations, but let's talk about concepts. Let's talk about deterrence. Let's talk about avoiding these, you know, dangerous situations. And, you know, that process is broken down with Russia and the United States. And I think there's some optimism that with the new administration, we will get that process going again and we'll save the remaining treaties. But the key is talking. And, you know, we are still trying to get the Chinese to talk about these concepts and strategic deterrence and nuclear weapons postures and things like that, and they don't want to do it. And I'll have to say, I spent a lot of my career, and you know, I don't know if you know it, but I have many good friends in Pakistan, and have been there a number of times, and have been.
Pakistan, whenever you arrive next time in Pakistan, inshallah, we'll be there.
I'm looking forward. I'm really looking forward to. I have a lot of friends, and including within your military, and foreign policy establishment, good old friends. But I mean, the reason for that is that I've been trying to encourage India and Pakistan to just talk, just talk, just talk about the lecture that we just had. Just talk about that. There doesn't even have to be specifics, because I believe that there's deterrence instability for the reason you cited. Right, you're exactly right that this dynamic is moving things in different and dangerous, potentially dangerous directions. And I really believe that the time has come when both India and Pakistan have sufficient forces already to ensure deterrence, and that could be consolidated if they would just talk and come to some sort of, I mean, I really think the time has come. Both Pakistan, and India have been nuclear weapons possessing countries for, a long time. And the time has come where I believe that India and Pakistan should develop some sort of mutual understanding of both the risks and the benefits of their nuclear postures. And so that is something that's near and dear to my heart. Actually, arms control in South Asia is something that I think is the time has come. It would be a real benefit to humankind, to both the futures of both countries would really greatly benefit by stabilizing this deterrent relationship.
Okay, class, if you have any questions, you may ask. This class, please.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. I have no questions, but I, w- I would thank you to take this a wonderful session for us. Thank you so much, sir.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me and for studying these things. And the future is with you, Alina. So I think we're all banking on your future. Does anyone feel optimistic or pessimistic about the future of nuclear deterrence, either in South Asia or in the world? Are you optimists or pessimists?
Yes, Wajid, would you like to add something? Yes, Wajid.
Come on, folks.
No, it's okay. It's okay. If you're having voice, it's okay.
Hello.
You may contribute. Yes, Abdullah. Abdullah, please.
We hear you.
Hello, Dr. Davis. Sir, on the question of optimism and pessimism, I would say that if you look at the history, I personally don't think that human beings learn from history. For example, wars have been fought over the history, and then we have, after the development in technology and science, we have World War I, and then immediately after that we have World War II, and then the Cold War, and then the other wars. So it appears that we do not learn from the history, although we have so much knowledge regarding the destruction and annihilation of humankind. So for, because of that reason, my views are pessimistic, although I'm not a student of I'm not majoring in political sciences. I am a student of English. So Sir Harris invited me, and it was a great session. I do have interest in these things, but from that perspective, I don't think that we are learning much from it.
Uh, that's a very astute observation, Abdullah. Let me just say there's some research in our field, and it's called nuclear learning. And one of my students, who happens to also she was formerly a professor at Qadi Azam, Sania Abdullah, who got her PhD and wrote her PhD dissertation on this concept of nuclear learning. So, Abdullah, you touched on a very good point, and that is the idea of nuclear learning. Is there such a thing, right? And it goes back to this thing I was talking about before, which is, do people learn, or do organizations learn, or do countries learn, right? Does a country accumulate nuclear knowledge? And if they learn, and here's the problem, and here's why I'm afraid I agree with you, which is do they learn good things or do they learn bad things? and what my student learned from her dissertation is that, yes, they learn a lot. It's all bad. They learn how to arms race. They learn how to make new weapons. They learn how to trick the opponent. They learn how to do all the things that we see as undermining, peace and security. So yes, there is nuclear learning, but it's bad learning, right? It's a little kid who learns how to lie, or a little kid, who learns like, well, if I just don't tell mom and dad, they learn, but they don't learn like peace. They don't learn, stability. They learn how to make better weapons. So you're right, but don't give up hope. You can still be optimistic. It can still work, even if that's true. And what we want to do is develop some nuclear learning in the areas like arms control, right? Where you manage it so that you reduce risks, and so that there's more communication between the adversaries, right? You have to talk to your adversary. Even if you hate their guts, it doesn't matter. You still have to. So nuclear learning maybe involves communication, right? Being able to talk to the enemy. That's important, right? For avoiding conflict. Even if, you don't have to like them. But if you do have to, we do have to avoid nuclear conflict. Right, we have to do that. Everyone has to do that. It's a very good question. Thanks for asking it. Smart.
Yes, class. Opinions from your side? Any questions? We are having a great chance to have Dr. Davis with us. So you're having a great opportunity to ask anything if you want to ask regarding nuclear defense,
May I?
Yes, budget, please.
Am I audible?
Hello.
So I would like to ask about the current state, nuclear state of China, Pakistan and South Asia. Uh, we know that China hasn't, acknowledged Pakistan and India as nuclear state, and what are the possible reasons behind that? And if it accepts, then uh, what will happen to the power dynamics in this region?
That's a great question. And it's one that I'm currently very interested in, and a lot of people are studying. So from your studies in your class, I'm sure you're all familiar with the difference between what is said and what is done. And in South Asia, amongst this new China and India and Pakistan, there is a pretty clear understanding, and it's relatively new. So you raise a good question. For many years, the Indians didn't want to accept the reality of Pakistan's nuclear capabilities, and the Indians were very slow to understand the true nature of Pakistan's commitment to deterrence. So in many ways, Pakistan jumped out ahead in this competition. And India has now come to understand that it is in a true deterrence relationship. But this, what we call a dyad, right? There's two parties, like the United States and the Soviet Union were a deterrence dyad, right? We have a relationship with that one party. And India and Pakistan have a very interesting dyad amongst themselves, but it's greatly complicated by the fact that there is now a third party that is deeply involved in the deterrent relationship. And so, whereas India now assumes, and I think incorrectly, but India assumes that China and Pakistan are allied together against it. Most outside observers don't believe that, and they see that Pakistan's more of an independent actor. China has its own interests, but has come to accept that it is in a nuclear competition with India. And India is still figuring it out. I mean, they're really in the middle of a situation that I think they haven't quite understood. And it's a complex form of deterrence that we've really never seen before. We've seen some complicated things like NATO, right? Where you have France and Great Britain and the Soviet Union, all with nuclear weapons. And so that's a complicated type of relationship, but it was all bundled together under the NATO policy. So it was really the West, the United States and NATO opposing the Soviet Union. That's a little more complicated now. But what you're talking about is a kind of a new triad that is unacknowledged, and that's the point you're making, which is, do people recognize the situation? Well, in defense circles, right, the people who study this stuff definitely understand, right, that these are all nuclear powers and they all have interests, and that they're all trying to deter aggression against themselves, right? No one really in that triad appears to be wanting to use nuclear weapons for aggression, right? And I think deterrence is, in a sense, in place. But where this triangular nuclear relationship is going to get super complicated, and you saw it a little bit, with the border conflicts. But they, fortunately, they did not have a nuclear dimension. But those are the kinds of conflicts that people worry about escalation, right? If it were to move to a general war, either, as it has in Kashmir between Pakistan and India, and now with China contesting border regions, there's always the risk for escalation. And to your question, I don't think anybody is really addressing this escalation problem. And we've run some war games with your colleagues from the Pakistan Army and General Staff, and we're at the early stages. I mean, that's a great topic for any of you to study. I mean, this really needs serious attention of the next generation, because there's great potential. The other area where there's real potential for this triangular relationship to be super complicated is on the maritime domain. And I don't know if you guys are interested in that, but this to me is one of the most interesting, but also troublesome areas is that with all of three countries, India, Pakistan, and China, fielding now sea-based deterrence systems, you've got a very complicated domain of weapons at sea. And this has a tremendous potential for misunderstanding, miscalculation, accidents. It's real serious risks in the maritime domain that could really be a great area for people to study. Very, very interesting, but troubling. And so, to answer your question, no, I don't think people understand it. It's kind of unique. It's not a situation that you can find a comparable, a comparable set of conditions elsewhere in the world. And I urge you, I invite you to study it. It needs you.
Yes, class. Any other questions? We have taken a lot of time, Doctor.
Okay, if we don't have time, it's okay.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. My question is...
I'm avoiding another meeting.
Okay. Okay, so my question is, we know about CPAC, right? Pakistan and China has been building up a strong relation through CPAC, but India is not really happy about it. And we know India, like BLA, they have been funding BLA, Balochistan Liberal Army, and they don't want to take China to take over Gwadar port. And India has been pushing BLA and giving them funds to spread terrorist attack and everything. What do you think about this? What will be the long-term effect? India is also involved in it. China, Pakistan, what do you think about it?
Yeah. Well, so I'm involved in what we call a track 2, which is a kind of a unofficial discussions amongst different countries. So this problem that you described has real potential to spark a broader conflict, and that's the problem. And so both countries have a history of meddling in the other country's internal affairs. All countries do it, right? So I'm not calling them out in particular, right? Russia's doing it to the United States every day, and China's doing it, and everyone's doing it. So but it's a dangerous business of messing in the internal affairs, especially if you're talking about funding violent groups that are planning attacks against society. This is dangerous business. And, we've seen it in Pakistan in particular, but we've seen it throughout the region and other places in the world, in the Middle East. And this temptation to exacerbate another country's internal problems, and what you're talking about in Balochistan is an old problem, but it goes to the heart of Pakistan, which is as a young country been constantly struggling to build a coherence amongst the different parts of Pakistan, right? Pakistan is made up of regions, and it's always been trying to build a coherence, and so it strikes at the heart of a country to fund and to support this kind of destructive element within the boundaries of a country. What that for us, the problem there is that with Baloch you're talking about, and you quite rightly connected it to Belt Road, CPAC, and all the other big issues that are going on. But that leads you also to the issue of Afghanistan, which is, intensely complicated, and also Iran, right? Because the other port that is competing for Chinese infrastructure support is Chabahar. And then you've got the competition, with India supporting Chabahar as an alternative to Gwadar, and so really, not surprisingly, Pakistan, right? Pakistan's a very important geostrategic player. Always has been. Always finds itself in the middle of these very difficult situations because it's an important country, and so you've got multiple dissenting groups that are detracting from the national purpose, from the national coherence of Pakistan, and it's annoying. But I would say that it's a longstanding problem that Pakistan's been handling fairly well, and I don't think it's really. I mean, it's annoying, and I'd say the same thing to the Indians because the truth of the matter is that Pakistan has done something similar with some of the groups that are contesting India's positions in multiple locations. So for neither country, I mean, are these the main points of contention? These are annoying, difficult, problematic problems, but they need to be managed. They need to be controlled and managed so that they don't escalate into a broader conflict. So I'm sympathetic, to Pakistan's position on this, but it also is not the main focus, and it won't, I believe, really cut to the heart of Pakistan's national identity. Even I know that there's a history in Baluch, and that these forces are detracting from the national national identity. It's the same kind of situation in Kashmir, maybe in some other places, but I would say those are things that need to be managed and not pull Pakistan off into bigger problems. Pakistan's got enough problems. So I would say manage that, and continue to do what Pakistan's been doing, which is to call it out. But that's every country has to live with. You see in the United States, we're dealing with this internal division ourselves in ways that were somewhat surprising, maybe even to us, but to the world. So that's just life in the international system and life along contested borders.
Okay, Dr. Davis, if you have time to entertain more queries, or we end our session here.
If there's another question, I'd be willing to entertain it.
Okay, one from my side. There is a dichotomy of nuclear deterrence, that the dual nature of nuclear deterrence, use of nuclear deterrence as a political tool to prevent the war. There is a concept, and the other side is to practically use it as a weapon of warfare. So what I see is that having balance of power in nuclear capacity will prevent the war, and it is being used as a political tool to prevent a war rather than any country has intention, a real intention to throw it to the other country, because it is a very destructive weapon, and none of the country will take the risk of doing so. So, what is your opinion regarding this?
Well, in the literature, this is known as, the paradox, right? It's self-contradictory. It's it's the stability instability paradox. The paradox being that in order to make deterrence believable, right, and scary, right, it has to be scary, right? The potential consequences have to be terrible for it to work. And so to make deterrence terrifying, you have to make the actual application of the weapons realistic, right? It has to be credible. So the term, the term is credibility. And so what that means is you have to prepare to use them. You can't have a recessed capability, an opaque capability. You can't have a capability that will take you, months, years. That doesn't work as a deterrent. A deterrent works if the actual, troops, launchers, if the forces are in place and look like they could actually be used, right? Then they have credibility. If they are imaginary, if they are proposed, if they haven't actually been built, then they're not credible. And if they're not credible, the adversary might be tempted to say, look, let's get these guys before they build all these weapons. And so it's the stability instability paradox, is that to build stability, you have to build in this instability, which is, to do things that you hope will never happen. But to make it less likely to happen, you have to make it really realistic that it could happen. So it's a paradox, and nobody's ever happy about it. And it goes back to the first point we were making about deterrence, which is, it's kind of a theory, but it's a hard theory to prove or disprove. And it involves these contradictions that we've learned to live with. But
okay. Hope we have. Do you have any questions, or we should end the session here? I think we have taken much time of Dr. Davis. Thank you very much, Dr. Davis, for giving us your precious time. And we are hoping to invite you again, and you'll be again benefiting us from this precious knowledge and the learning that you have. So thank you very much from my side and from my class, Pakistan. And
Thank you, sir.
thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you for enlightening us with your knowledge.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much. And there are 2 universities which are listening, Institute of Business Management and Sebest.
Oh, good.
From International Relations. So I invited my other class too.
Good. I'm very happy to do it. I'm really indebted to you, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. Do it again.
Thank you very much, Doctor. So nice of you.
Salam.
Walaikum salam.
Yeah.